typically that goes to escrow and then it goes towards their closing cost at the end of the transaction. But because it's such a strong seller's market, some sellers are requesting that earnest money get released to them immediately after it gets to escrow as a non-refundable deposit. So I'd be curious to hear your guys' thoughts on the risks and dangers in doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of those things that's really, really, I consider it crazy, in the sense of, I guess I am a little more old school, and I know that there's a time and a season for everything, but, to release it as a non-refundable deposit, to the seller, I mean, you're almost, there's no protection in the sale, at that point. And so,
well, the trip ups are like, okay, I feel like a lot of people don't know a lot about escrow, so they don't really realize like what we mean by like, not like you'll be talking to your buyer and saying like, okay, well you could release the earnest money, but that means you can never get it back no matter what. And I feel like there's a lot of buyers who are like, oh, but we're good, we're like pending, we're mutual, like it's all fine. Yeah. And they just don't realize like, no, there's like 800 million ways during escrow where something could go wrong. In that case, you usually would get your earnest money back if something goes wrong during escrow, like something falls through on the seller's end or they can't perform or something falls through on your end that you're covered for. Like if you don't get financing and you had a financing contingency, then you're covered, and if that happened, you would get your money back normally. But if you just release it, then they're like, oh, it doesn't matter that this was under contract and all of it was, you released it already, so it doesn't matter what happens. You just won't ever get that money back.
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing on the listing side, because you're talking about the buying side, we are seeing that sellers are accepting where that comes across as a deposit. But in the case of like a seller breach or the title isn't good, that is where it's refundable back to the buyer. Yeah. So the buyer can still get that back to them if there was something that they did, that the seller did that was a breach. And sellers are accepting of that risk of that. I think it's just a dangerous thing in the sense of someone gets a hold of that money. Is that money going to get spent? Yeah. Because it gets released to them immediately. It doesn't sit in an account. What happens if it gets spent and there is a breach and a seller doesn't sell? Now that buyer is going to be going through a lot of litigation trying to get that money back too. Yeah. And so it's one of those things. This is, I think, again, something that I'll be excited about when the market slows down and we can stop using some of these tactics to win homes.
Yeah.
But I definitely think it's something that someone needs to move with caution, because to Paige's point, I always like to ask folks, one of the biggest things that come up during the transactions, or if there's like two of them I can think of. Number one, job security and purchases. And so a buyer can control their purchases, but those are usually the things that will come up and cause a lender to say no, especially with how our lenders are so well educated now. They tend to have the loan pretty well in hand of understanding the buyer's affordability index. But it's something where with their job, that's outside of the scope of what anybody can do. And I've had folks go through the process and go, hey, I lost my job today, and that is automatically a showstopper. And in that case, they don't not only lose their job, but now they would be out that type of money.
Well, and I think the other thing is like, depending on the purchase size, like if you're buying some land and it's like you're at like 65 grand or something, your earnest money might not be that much. And so if you're like, well, yeah, sure, whatever, it's not a big deal to me. But I think too, the other thing is another one of the tactics recently has been giving more earnest money. So it's like, I'm going to up the amount of my earnest money and just give it away, but.
So what do you, how do you talk to the buyers about that?
Well, I mean, typically what I'll do is I'll talk to the listing agent and find out what the competition looks like, what are other offers, that are coming in look like? What do we need to do to make our offer look attractive? And if one of the things that they say is that the sellers has expenses coming up that they need to pay for while we're in escrow, so if you could make the earnest money a non-refundable deposit, that would make your offer look a lot stronger. Then you have to have the conversation with the buyer and let them know. And this is why I think it's really important to not just pick some random real estate agent to represent you. You need to have somebody who will have the patience and understanding to talk through what are the risks, what does this mean. When they say non-refundable earnest money deposit, I need to be able to explain that to my clients in a way that they completely understand what the risks are, why it looks good to the seller, why it's important to them, and the risks that we're putting on their money.
Yeah, and also I feel like it's client dependent, because like we're kind of talking about this like it's crazy, like I think you said earlier, like it's something we don't like to do. But also if you have a buyer who's like all cash, no contingencies, like in a situation like that, it might be like, okay, well, if you know you have all cash and you already have proof of funds and you're not worried about financing and you're not doing an inspection contingency and you're not doing like all this other stuff, then there isn't that much going on during escrow. And so it's like, okay, if, to your point, Pete, like if you call the listing agent and they say, hey, this would be really helpful, and you're going in like, well, we've already waived everything and we have all cash anyways, like what, I think that in that case, it's like my advice would be like, for you guys, this seems smart because the likelihood that something's going to go wrong during an escrow where you're not doing anything is highly unlikely. So like in that situation, it might be just like the cherry on top that's needed. But then if you have buyers who are like first-time home buyers, who have their financing contingency, who have kids, who, like you just want to make sure like you said too, like having a real estate agent who's going to take the time to get to know like your family and your lifestyle so that they know, because otherwise like I definitely know that there's agents out there who are either like, oh my gosh, it's crazy, you should never, or agents who are like, oh yeah, it's not a big deal, go for it. And it's like, okay, yes, it's unlikely, but I say that and it's like, you say unlikely because it doesn't happen as often to an individual agent, but I feel like deals fall through all the time. So, it's just definitely, I like what you said about having an agent who's gonna make sure to know that so that you can make the right call.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it how you explain it to the buyers too. I mean, I think that's super important, and I think it's one of those things that our jobs, right, is to protect that money, to make sure it gets to close, and I think you do a fantastic job at that.
Thank you, appreciate that.
All right, well, thank you for watching our mini masterminds. You can check more of these out here on our YouTube channel, and remember, today is a great day that you can create positive change. Take care, everyone.